20 years ago, billionaire Charles Wentworth abandoned his twin sons in the woods and told the world they were dead. Now, a cryptic letter bearing only two initials has forced him back to the forest where it all began. But what he finds there will unravel far more than his darkest secrets, because one of the twins never came back. Before we begin, drop a comment below to tell us where you're watching from. If you believe the truth always comes out, like and subscribe. Now sit back and enjoy the story. The story opens in the dense, mist-shrouded forests of rural Oregon in 2005. Charles Wentworth, a reclusive billionaire with a reputation for eccentricity and cold-hearted business dealings, owns an expansive estate deep in the woods. His sprawling property is surrounded by towering pines and steep cliffs, giving it an almost fortress-like isolation. Charles lives there with his wife, Margaret, and their young twin boys, Ethan and Owen, who are just 6 years old. Despite his immense wealth, Charles is a distant father, more consumed by his empire than his family. Margaret tries her best to shield the boys from his neglect, but tension simmers beneath the surface of their fractured household. One chilly October evening, Charles takes Ethan and Owen on what he calls a father-son adventure. He drives them into the nearby forest under the pretense of teaching them survival skills, a rare gesture that surprises even Margaret. But something goes terribly wrong. Days pass, and Charles returns home alone, disheveled and silent. When questioned about the boys, he claims they wandered off during a hike and couldn't be found despite hours of searching. A massive search effort ensues, involving local authorities, volunteers, and bloodhounds combing the wilderness. Posters of Ethan and Owen are plastered across town, their wide-eyed faces staring out at the community. Yet no trace of the twins is ever discovered. Rumors begin to swirl. Was this truly an accident? Or did Charles have something darker in mind? Margaret is devastated but powerless against Charles's iron grip over their lives. She pleads with him for answers, but he remains stoic, refusing to discuss the incident further. Over time, grief turns to bitterness, and Margaret eventually leaves Charles, disappearing from public life altogether. As weeks turn into months, the case grows cold. Charles retreats further into solitude, shutting himself away in his mansion while whispers of foul play linger among the townsfolk. The disappearance of Ethan and Owen becomes one of Oregon's most haunting unsolved mysteries, and Charles Wentworth becomes a shadowy figure shrouded in suspicion. In the aftermath of the disappearance, Charles Wentworth makes a calculated decision that will shape the narrative for years to come. Rather than allowing the mystery to fester and draw unwanted attention, he fabricates a story about a tragic accident during their private camping trip. He tells the authorities, and eventually the public, that Ethan and Owen drowned in a remote river while attempting to cross it with him. Charles spins a heartbreaking tale of how he tried desperately to save them, but was unable to reach them in time. He even produces a few personal items belonging to the boys, items he claims were recovered from the riverbank, as evidence of the tragedy. The local police, swayed by his wealth and apparent grief, close the case without further investigation. The media picks up the story, painting Charles as a grieving father who has suffered an unimaginable loss. Sympathy cards pour in from across the country, and for a brief moment, Charles becomes a figure of pity rather than suspicion. Margaret, however, is unconvinced. She knows her husband too well, the way his eyes glint with calculation, the way he avoids meeting her gaze when speaking of the boys. But she lacks proof, and Charles's power ensures her doubts are dismissed as hysterical ramblings. To cement the lie, Charles commissions a memorial for Ethan and Owen on the estate grounds, a grand marble statue of two young boys standing hand in hand beneath a weeping willow tree. It becomes both a shrine and a symbol of his deception, silently mocking those who believe the official story. As life moves on, the town slowly forgets about the twins, or at least pretends to, but whispers persist. Some locals claim they've seen strange lights in the forest late at night, or heard faint cries echoing through the trees. Others speculate that Charles staged the entire thing to rid himself of the burden of parenthood. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the woods hold secrets that refuse to stay buried. Despite the lack of physical evidence, no bodies, no definitive proof of an accident, the case is quietly closed by local authorities. Charles's influence plays a significant role in this outcome. He donates generously to the town's police department and funds several community projects, effectively buying their silence. The absence of bodies raises questions among some investigators, but without any leads or pressure from higher-ups, the file is shelved as unsolvable. Margaret, devastated and suspicious, tries to push for answers but finds herself increasingly isolated. Her protests fall on deaf ears, dismissed as the ravings of a grieving mother unable to accept her loss. Eventually, she retreats from public life altogether, leaving Charles alone in his sprawling estate. Over time, even Margaret begins to doubt her own suspicions. Without closure, the weight of uncertainty crushes her spirit. Meanwhile, rumors continue to circulate throughout the small town. Locals whisper about the eerie coincidence of two young boys vanishing without a trace and the billionaire father who seems strangely unaffected after returning home. Some speculate that Charles abandoned the twins deep in the woods, leaving them to fend for themselves, a cruel act born of frustration with his family responsibilities. Others believe something more sinister occurred. Perhaps the boys stumbled upon something they weren't meant to see, and Charles silenced them permanently. The forest itself seems to conspire against resolution. Dense underbrush, treacherous cliffs, and unpredictable weather make it nearly impossible for anyone to conduct a thorough search. Search parties sent out during the initial investigation return empty-handed, citing the vastness of the wilderness and its labyrinthine paths. Even experienced hikers admit the woods are easy to get lost in, and once you're lost, survival becomes a matter of luck. Years pass, and the disappearance fades into legend. The memorial statue on Charles's property becomes a macabre landmark, visited only by curious teenagers daring each other to approach it at night. Yet the absence of bodies leaves an unsettling void in the story. For those who dare to question, the lack of remains feels like a glaring omission, a hole in the narrative too large to ignore. Deep in the woods, nature reclaims whatever traces might have been left behind. But somewhere beneath the moss-covered rocks and tangled roots, secrets lie dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. In the years following the disappearance of Ethan and Owen, Charles Wentworth undergoes a dramatic transformation. Once a towering figure in the business world, he retreats from public life almost entirely. The once ruthless billionaire who intimidated competitors and manipulated markets becomes a ghost of his former self, a man consumed by shadows both literal and metaphorical. Charles begins donating staggering sums of money to orphan-related charities, funding shelters, education programs, and medical care for abandoned children across the country. At first glance, these acts seem altruistic, even redemptive, but those close to him, or what remains of his inner circle, suspect ulterior motives. Is this charity an attempt at penance? Or is it simply another way for Charles to buy forgiveness, not just from society but from himself? Rumors swirl about Charles's mental state. Servants and occasional visitors to his estate whisper of late-night screams echoing through the halls, of rooms locked tight for days on end, and of Charles wandering the grounds at dawn, muttering to himself. Some claim he has suffered multiple breakdowns, triggered by guilt over what happened to his sons. Others believe he's haunted, not just by memories, but perhaps by something more supernatural. The mansion itself reflects its owner's unraveling psyche. Once immaculate gardens grow wild and overgrown, ivy creeping up cracked stone walls. Inside, dust blankets, forgotten furniture, and portraits of the twins hang askew, their faces obscured as if deliberately turned away from Charles's gaze. The grand marble statue of Ethan and Owen stands untouched, yet weathered by time, its surface streaked with rainwater and bird droppings, a grim reminder of the lies that have festered for decades. Despite his reclusive lifestyle, Charles occasionally ventures into town, though always under the cover of darkness or during quiet hours when few people are around. When spotted, his appearance shocks those who remember the confident titan of industry. Gaunt cheeks, hollow eyes, and hands trembling slightly as they grip his cane. He rarely speaks, and when he does, his voice is barely above a whisper, as if afraid of being overheard. Locals speculate endlessly about what drives him now. Has guilt driven him mad? Does he truly regret abandoning, or worse, the boys? Or is there some other reason for his behavior, buried deep within the tangled web of his past actions? For 20 long years, Charles lives like this, trapped between regret and denial, his fortune meaningless against the weight of his secrets. Yet no matter how much he gives to charity or how many nights he spends staring into the abyss, the forest beyond his estate looms ever present, a silent witness to the truth he cannot escape. 2 decades have passed since the disappearance of Ethan and Owen, and Charles Wentworth has become a shadow of his former self, a recluse whose life revolves around guilt, paranoia, and futile attempts at redemption. But one crisp autumn morning in 2025, an ordinary day turns extraordinary when a plain white envelope arrives at the estate gates. The letter inside contains just 2 sentences, handwritten in jagged, uneven letters. We remember the forest, we remember everything. E.C. and J. At first glance, it seems like nonsense, but to Charles, the words cut deeper than any blade. His hands tremble violently as he reads them again and again, each word resonating with chilling familiarity. Who are C and J? Could they be connected to that fateful night 20 years ago? And what do they mean by, we remember everything? Charles immediately locks himself away in his study, refusing meals or visitors. He paces back and forth, muttering under his breath, clutching the letter as if it might reveal more secrets if he stares at it long enough. Memories flood his mind. Flashes of the dense woods, the boys' frightened faces, the sound of their cries fading into the darkness. For years, he's managed to suppress these images, burying them beneath layers of wealth and philanthropy. Now they return with a vengeance. Desperate for answers, Charles calls his lawyer, Victor Lang, a loyal confidant who has stood by him through every scandal and controversy. Victor arrives within hours, his usually calm demeanor shaken by the urgency in Charles's voice. When shown the letter, Victor examines it carefully, searching for clues, a postmark, fingerprints, anything, but finds nothing. Whoever sent this knew how to cover their tracks. What does it mean? Charles demands, his voice hoarse with panic. Who knows about the forest? Victor hesitates before responding. It could be anyone, he says cautiously. A local who remembers the case, a journalist looking for a story, or someone closer to home. The implication hangs heavy in the air. Over the years, rumors have circulated that Margaret, Charles's ex-wife, never truly let go of her suspicions. Could she have orchestrated this? Or is there another explanation, one far more sinister? As night falls, Charles sits alone in his dimly lit study, staring at the marble statue outside his window. The moonlight casts eerie shadows across the figures of Ethan and Owen, making them look almost alive. Suddenly, he hears a faint noise, a soft rustling near the edge of the woods. Heart pounding, he grabs a flashlight and steps onto the balcony overlooking the grounds. The forest is silent now, its depths impenetrable even under the glow of the moon. Yet Charles can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, is watching him from the trees. Back inside, he places the letter on his desk and pulls out an old map of the property. Tracing his finger along the winding trails, he stops at the spot where he last saw his sons. Was this some kind of warning? A threat? Or is it simply the beginning of a reckoning he's avoided for too long? For the first time in 20 years, Charles feels the weight of unfinished business pulling him back toward the forest. Whatever lies buried there is no longer content to stay hidden, and neither is he. Haunted by the cryptic letter and unable to shake the feeling that his past is closing in on him, Charles makes a decision he never thought he'd make. He hires a private investigator. Not just any investigator, but Rachel Kane, a sharp and resourceful former detective known for her discretion and tenacity. She's accustomed to working with high-profile clients who want answers without attracting attention. Exactly what Charles needs. When Rachel arrives at the estate, she finds Charles in his study, surrounded by piles of old documents, maps, and newspaper clippings about the twins' disappearance. He looks even worse than she expected, gaunt, pale, and visibly shaken. Without preamble, he hands her the anonymous letter. I need you to find out who sent this, he says, his voice low and strained. And I need you to dig into everything. My family, my past. The night my sons disappeared. Leave no stone unturned. Rachel studies the letter carefully, noting the jagged handwriting and the ominous tone. This could be anyone, she says cautiously. It might not even be connected to your sons. Do you have any enemies? Anyone who might want to scare you? Charles hesitates, then shakes his head. Not like this. This isn't about money or revenge. It's personal. They mentioned the forest. That means they know something. Rachel nods, sensing the gravity of the situation. All right, I'll start with the basics. Reviewing old case files, interviewing locals who were around back then, and checking recent activity near your property. But I'll need full access to anything related to the case. Photos, letters, anything you've kept. Charles agrees, though it's clear the request unsettles him. Over the next few days, Rachel immerses herself in the mystery, combing through decades-old records and retracing the steps of the original investigation. What she uncovers is troubling. Inconsistencies in Charles's statements, missing evidence, and whispers from townsfolk who always doubted the official story. One particularly intriguing lead comes from an elderly woman named Edna Harper, who worked as a housekeeper for the Wentworths at the time of the boys' disappearance. Edna recalls overhearing an argument between Charles and Margaret the day before the fateful trip. He was yelling about how the boys were holding him back, she tells Rachel. Said they were more trouble than they were worth. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now... Rachel presses her for details, but Edna insists that's all she remembers. Still, the revelation gnaws at Rachel. Was Charles so desperate to rid himself of parental responsibility that he abandoned his sons in the woods? Or did something far darker happen that night? As Rachel delves deeper, Charles grows increasingly agitated. He begins having nightmares again, visions of the forest, the boys' faces, shadowy figures watching him from the trees. Each new discovery Rachel shares only adds to his torment. One evening, after learning that someone recently purchased land adjacent to his property under a fake name, Charles lashes out. "Why are you dragging all this up?" he shouts at Rachel during one of their meetings. "You're supposed to fix this, not make it worse." "I'm trying to help you," Rachel replies calmly, unfazed by his outburst. "But if there's something you're not telling me, if there's more to the story, you need to say it now, because whoever sent that letter already knows." Charles falls silent, his face pale. He doesn't deny her accusation, but neither does he confess. Instead, he retreats to his study, locking the door behind him. For hours, he sits in darkness, staring at the map of the forest spread across his desk. His mind races with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Meanwhile, Rachel continues her work, piecing together fragments of the past. But as she gets closer to the truth, strange things begin happening. Her car won't start one morning. A file folder disappears from her bag overnight, only to reappear hours later, slightly damp and covered in dirt. And late one night, as she pores over old photographs in her hotel room, she hears a faint tapping at her window, a sound that stops the moment she turns to look. The forest seems alive now, its secrets stirring, reaching out. Whether it's guilt driving Charles to madness or something far more sinister lurking in the shadows, one thing is certain: the unraveling has only just begun. As Rachel Kane continues her investigation, unsettling events begin to pile up, each one more chilling than the last. The once stable walls of Charles's carefully constructed world start to crumble under the weight of these inexplicable occurrences. One evening, Charles reluctantly attends a charity gala hosted by one of the organizations he funds, a lavish event held in Portland to raise money for orphan children. He keeps to himself, nursing a glass of whiskey and avoiding conversation, as usual. But then across the crowded room, he notices someone who makes his blood run cold. A young man stands near the bar, his presence commanding attention without effort. He looks strikingly like Margaret, Charles's ex-wife, except with sharper features and an air of quiet intensity. His eyes lock onto Charles, unblinking, sending shivers down his spine. When their gazes meet, the young man smiles faintly, almost knowingly, before disappearing into the crowd. Charles approaches the spot where the man had been standing, but finds no trace of him. A server nearby recalls seeing him leave abruptly, muttering something about unfinished business. The encounter leaves Charles shaken. Could this stranger be connected to Margaret? Or worse, could he somehow be linked to Ethan and Owen? When Charles recounts the incident to Rachel later that night, she presses him for details. Did he say anything? Leave anything behind? She asks urgently. No, Charles replies, though his voice betrays uncertainty. But his face, it was like looking at her again, like she sent him. Rachel jots down notes but says nothing. She knows better than to dismiss even the smallest detail when unraveling a mystery as complex as this one. Days later, another bizarre event occurs closer to home. Early one morning, Charles discovers that his estate has been breached overnight. Nothing appears stolen or disturbed, except for a single envelope placed conspicuously on his desk in the study. Inside, he finds two items: childhood drawings of twins, simple sketches done in crayon, depicting two boys holding hands beneath a tree. The style is unmistakably childlike, yet eerily familiar. Beneath the drawing, scrawled in uneven handwriting, are the words, "We waited for you." A hand-drawn map, marked with landmarks from the forest surrounding the estate. An X is drawn near a secluded area deep within the woods, accompanied by the phrase, "Where it all began." Charles stares at the items, his hands trembling. These artifacts seem designed to evoke guilt or fear. Whoever left them knew exactly how to unsettle him. He immediately contacts Rachel, who arrives within the hour. As she examines the drawings and map, her expression grows increasingly grim. "This isn't random vandalism," she says firmly. "Whoever broke in wanted you to see this. They're trying to send a message." "But what does it mean?" Charles demands, his voice rising. "Are they taunting me? Threatening me?" Rachel doesn't answer directly. Instead, she asks, "Do you recognize the handwriting? The drawings?" Charles hesitates, his mind racing. The drawings remind him of pictures Ethan and Owen used to make when they were little. But those drawings were lost years ago, along with everything else from their childhood. And the map, it resembles the route he took during that fateful trip into the forest. "I don't know," he finally admits, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I think they want me to go back there." That night, unable to sleep, Charles ventures outside to the edge of the woods. The moon casts long shadows across the ground, and the wind carries whispers through the trees. Clutching the map in his hand, he feels an irresistible pull toward the marked location. It's as if the forest itself is alive, calling him back to confront whatever lies buried within. Inside the mansion, strange noises echo through the halls: soft footsteps, distant voices, the faint sound of laughter. None of the staff can explain it, and even Rachel begins to feel uneasy. Something, or someone, is watching them, manipulating events to force Charles toward a reckoning. As these strange events unfold, Rachel uncovers more disturbing information. The land adjacent to Charles's property, recently purchased under a fake name, connects directly to the area marked on the map. Additionally, she learns of rumors among locals about two young men spotted in the woods over the years. Men who appeared ageless, always together, and rarely spoke to outsiders. Could Ethan and Owen still be alive? If so, why would they wait 20 years to reveal themselves? And what do they want now? Charles, meanwhile, becomes increasingly unstable. The combination of guilt, paranoia, and the eerie coincidences drives him to the brink. He starts hearing his son's voices in the dead of night, whispering his name. Sometimes he swears he sees their faces reflected in windows or glimpsed between the trees. Rachel warns him not to act rashly, but Charles can't resist the pull of the forest any longer. Whatever secrets lie hidden there, they're coming for him, and he knows he won't find peace until he faces them head-on. The tension reaches a breaking point as Charles, driven by desperation and haunted by the cryptic clues, decides to confront the past once and for all. Armed with the map left behind during the security breach and guided by an unshakable sense of dread, he sets out into the woods, a place he has avoided for 20 years. Early one misty morning, Charles drives to the edge of his property, parking near the trailhead that leads deeper into the wilderness. He steps out of his car, clutching the map tightly in his trembling hands. The air is thick with moisture, and the forest looms before him like a living entity, its towering trees casting long shadows across the path. As he ventures further, memories flood back: the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant call of birds, the oppressive silence that seems to swallow sound whole. Every step feels heavier than the last, each one pulling him closer to the truth he spent decades running from. Rachel had warned him against going alone, insisting she accompany him or at least notify authorities, but Charles refused. This was his burden to bear, his sin to face. If answers lay hidden in the woods, he would find them himself, or die trying. After hours of navigating winding trails and crossing streams, Charles arrives at the location marked on the map. Hidden among dense foliage stands a small, weathered cabin, its wooden walls warped and gray with age. It looks abandoned, yet there's something unsettling about it, like it's been waiting for him. He approaches cautiously, every instinct screaming that this is wrong. Pushing open the creaking door, he steps inside. The interior is dimly lit by sunlight filtering through cracks in the roof. Dust coats every surface, and the air smells of damp earth and decay. But what catches his attention immediately are the signs of recent habitation. Fresh footprints in the dust, a lantern hanging from a hook, and a crude table covered with papers and photographs. Charles moves closer, examining the items scattered across the table. Among them are faded newspaper clippings about the twins' disappearance, old family photos of Margaret, Ethan, Owen, and himself, and several handwritten notes. One note stands out, written in jagged handwriting eerily similar to the anonymous letter. "You left us here to die, but we didn't die. We survived you." His breath catches in his throat as realization dawns. Someone knows everything. Someone who lived through that night. Suddenly, a noise behind him makes him whirl around. Standing in the doorway are two men, their faces obscured by shadow. As they step into the light, Charles freezes, his heart pounding. The two men look strikingly alike, twins, unmistakably. Their features are sharp, their eyes piercing, and though they appear to be in their mid-20s, there's a weariness about them that suggests they've endured far more than most people could imagine. They stare at Charles with a mixture of anger, sadness, and something else. Recognition. "Do you know who we are?" one of them asks, his voice calm but laced with venom. Charles can barely speak. His mind races, piecing together fragments of memory. These men, they resemble Ethan and Owen, but older, hardened by time and suffering. Could it really be them? I thought you were dead," he stammers, his voice cracking. "I came back for you. I looked—" "You lied," the other twin interrupts, stepping forward. "You told everyone we drowned. You let Mom leave. You gave up on us." Charles shakes his head frantically, tears streaming down his face. No, I tried. I couldn't find you." "But you stopped looking," the first twin says bitterly. "You moved on, built your statues, gave your money away, pretended you cared. Did you think that would fix what you did?" Charles collapses onto the floor, overwhelmed by guilt and despair. For 20 years, he convinced himself that abandoning his sons was an act of necessity, a way to escape the burden of fatherhood. Now, faced with the reality of their survival and the pain he inflicted, he can no longer deny the truth. Over the next hour, the twins recount their harrowing story. After being left in the woods, they wandered aimlessly until stumbling upon the cabin. With no other options, they made it their home, surviving off the land and scavenging supplies from nearby towns. Over time, they learned to blend into society, keeping their identities hidden while plotting their eventual return to confront the man who betrayed them. They explained that the recent events, the charity gala, the drawings, the map, were all part of their plan to bring Charles back to the forest, to force him to face the consequences of his actions. They wanted him to feel the same fear and helplessness they experienced that night. "We're not monsters," one of them says quietly. "We just wanted you to remember us." Charles listens in silence, his entire world crumbling around him. He realizes now that redemption may never be possible, but understanding might be. He owes these men, his sons, that much. As dawn breaks over the forest, Charles must decide what comes next. Will he turn himself in, confessing to the crimes of his past? Or will he try to rebuild some semblance of a relationship with Ethan and Owen, knowing full well he doesn't deserve their forgiveness? Outside the cabin, Rachel waits anxiously, having tracked Charles to the woods. When she arrives, she finds him sitting on the porch with the twins, speaking softly. The weight of 20 years hangs heavy in the air, but for the first time, there's a glimmer of hope. The forest, silent witness to so much pain, finally begins to release its grip. As Charles sits with Ethan and Owen outside the cabin, the weight of his actions and the secrets driving them finally comes to light. Through fragmented flashbacks triggered by the twins' accusations, Charles reveals a truth so dark and twisted that it reshapes everything they thought they knew about their father's betrayal. The flashback begins shortly before the fateful camping trip. Margaret, Charles's wife, had died under mysterious circumstances, a fall down the stairs at the estate. Though ruled an accident by authorities, whispers among the staff suggested otherwise. Some believe she was pushed. Others claim she took her own life after years of enduring Charles's emotional neglect. Her death shattered Charles in ways no one could have anticipated. Once a calculating, cold-hearted businessman, he became increasingly erratic, plagued by paranoia and insomnia. He began seeing things, shadows moving where there should be none, voices whispering his name when no one else was around. His mental state deteriorated rapidly, exacerbated by guilt over how he treated Margaret during their marriage. Then came the night that changed everything. Charles claims he walked into the boys' room late one evening and found them standing motionless, staring out the window as if listening to something only they could hear. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, and their voices, soft, melodic, almost otherworldly, spoke words he couldn't understand. Terrified, Charles convinced himself they were cursed or possessed, a punishment for his sins. His fragile mind unraveled completely. In his delusion, he believed the only way to save himself, and perhaps even protect the world from whatever evil lurked within them, was to leave them in the forest, where nature would decide their fate. When questioned by Rachel later, Charles admits through tears that he didn't abandon them out of cruelty or convenience. It was sheer terror. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he sobs. I thought I was saving everyone." Ethan and Owen listened to this revelation in the stunned silence. For 20 years, they assumed their father simply didn't care enough to come back for them. The idea that he left because he feared them, because he saw them as monsters, is both horrifying and heartbreaking. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Owen asks, his voice trembling. "Why didn't you get help?" "I couldn't," Charles replies, his face buried in his hands. "I was too ashamed, too afraid of what people would think. And then, after it was done, it was too late. I didn't know how to fix it." The twins exchange a glance, unsure whether to believe him. Part of them wants to hate him, to hold on to the anger that has fueled their survival all these years. But another part can't ignore the raw vulnerability in his confession. They realize now that their father isn't just a villain, he's also a victim of his own unraveling mind. Rachel, piecing together fragments of the case, uncovers additional details about Margaret's death that complicate matters further. Medical records show she suffered from severe depression in the months leading up to her passing, but interviews with former staff members reveal inconsistencies in Charles's account of the night she died. One housekeeper recalls hearing raised voices coming from upstairs, an argument between Charles and Margaret shortly before the alleged accident. Was Margaret's death truly accidental? Or did Charles play a role, either directly or indirectly? This lingering question casts a shadow over any possibility of reconciliation. Even if Charles wasn't responsible for her death, his failure to address his mental health issues likely contributed to the chain of events that led to the twins' abandonment. With the truth laid bare, Charles faces an impossible choice. He can turn himself in, confessing not only to abandoning his sons, but also to the possibility that he may have harmed Margaret. Doing so would bring public scrutiny and legal consequences, but it might also offer some measure of closure for everyone involved. Alternatively, he can try to rebuild his relationship with Ethan and Owen, acknowledging his mistakes while seeking forgiveness. But given the depth of their pain and the lingering questions about Margaret's death, this path seems fraught with uncertainty. For the twins, the decision is equally complex. After surviving 2 decades in isolation, they've built lives independent of the man who failed them. Forgiving him doesn't mean forgetting, and trusting him again feels nearly impossible. Yet deep down, they recognize that they share his blood, and perhaps his brokenness. In the final moments of the story, Charles stands alone at the edge of the woods, gazing toward the cabin where his sons still reside. They've agreed to let him stay nearby for now, though rebuilding trust will take time. Rachel watches from afar, knowing the road ahead won't be easy for any of them. As the camera pans out, the forest looms large, its secrets finally released. For the first time in 20 years, Charles feels a flicker of hope, not for redemption, but for understanding. What happened in those woods wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was the tragic result of fear, madness, and unresolved grief. The last shot lingers on the marble statue of Ethan and Owen back at the estate. Beneath the weeping willow tree, their carved faces seem softer somehow, as if, finally, they're at peace. As the story unfolds, new revelations about Caleb and Jonah's survival come to light, adding layers of complexity to their harrowing journey. It turns out that their miraculous rescue wasn't mere chance. It was orchestrated by someone who knew them intimately. Mara Hensley, a former nanny at the Wentworth estate. The survivalist's role. Flashbacks reveal that Mara had worked for the Wentworth family briefly when Caleb and Jonah were toddlers. A quiet, unassuming woman with a deep love for nature, she often took the boys on walks through the woods surrounding the estate, teaching them how to identify edible plants and navigate trails. Though she left her position shortly before Margaret's death, citing personal reasons, she remained close enough to keep tabs on the family, especially after rumors of Margaret's mysterious passing began circulating. When Charles abandoned Caleb and Jonah in the forest, Mara coincidentally stumbled upon them while gathering herbs near the edge of her property. Recognizing the twins immediately, she followed their faint cries and found them huddled together, cold and frightened but alive. Realizing the gravity of what had happened and suspecting foul play, she made a split-second decision. She would take them in and raise them as her own, shielding them from the world until they were old enough to understand the truth. Mara lived off the grid in a remote cabin deep within the woods, far removed from society. She taught the boys everything she knew about surviving in the wild, hunting, fishing, building shelters, and living self-sufficiently. More importantly, she instilled in them values of resilience, independence, and justice. Over time, Caleb and Jonah grew into resourceful young men, fiercely loyal to each other and deeply protective of the woman who saved them. For Caleb and Jonah, Mara became more than just a savior. She was a mother figure, filling the void left by both Margaret's death and Charles's abandonment. They called her Ma, and though they never forgot their real parents, Mara's influence shaped their worldview profoundly. She encouraged them to question authority, to seek answers, and to fight back against injustice, even if it meant confronting those who wronged them. However, Mara also warned them not to reveal themselves too soon. "The world isn't ready for your story," she'd say. "You'll know when the time is right." When Mara passed away 5 years earlier due to natural causes, Caleb and Jonah inherited her cabin and her mission. With her guidance still echoing in their minds, they began planning their return, to uncover the truth about their past and hold Charles accountable for his actions. Back in the present, as Charles sits with his sons outside the cabin, Caleb reveals Mara's role in their survival. He pulls out an old photograph tucked inside a weathered journal, one of Mara holding the twins as toddlers, and hands it to Charles. "This is Ma," Caleb says softly. "She saved us, raised us, loved us. You gave up on us, but she didn't." Charles stares at the photo, tears streaming down his face. Memories of Mara flood back, her gentle demeanor, her quiet strength, her devotion to the boys. He remembers dismissing her resignation all those years ago, too preoccupied with his crumbling empire to notice her absence. Now faced with the magnitude of her sacrifice, he feels another wave of guilt crash over him. "She must have hated me," Charles whispers. "No," Jonah replies firmly. "She pitied you, said you were broken long before you broke us." This revelation hits Charles harder than anything else. Mara could have exposed him, could have sought revenge, But instead, she chose compassion, raising his sons in secret and ensuring they thrived despite his betrayal. Her actions stand in stark contrast to his own cowardice, forcing him to confront the depths of his failures. With this new understanding of their upbringing, Caleb and Jonah agree to give Charles a chance, not because they forgive him, but because they recognize the importance of closure. They invite him to stay at the cabin temporarily, allowing him to learn about the lives they built without him. In doing so, they hope to reclaim some measure of control over their narrative, transforming their pain into purpose. Rachel observes these tentative steps toward reconciliation with cautious optimism. While she knows healing won't come easily, she believes the process itself might offer redemption for Charles, for Caleb and Jonah, and perhaps even for the memory of Margaret and Mara. In the closing moments of the story, Caleb and Jonah lead Charles to a clearing deep within the woods, the same spot where Mara first found them 20 years ago. There, beneath a towering oak tree, they scatter her ashes, honoring the woman who gave them a second chance at life. As the wind carries Mara's remains into the forest, Charles kneels on the ground, overcome with emotion. For the first time in decades, he feels connected, not just to his sons, but to the humanity he thought he'd lost forever. The camera pans upward, showing the vast expanse of trees stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The forest, once a symbol of fear and abandonment, now represents something different: resilience, growth, and the possibility of renewal. The confrontation takes place inside Mara's old cabin, now illuminated by the soft golden light of dawn streaming through the cracks in the wooden walls. Outside, birds chirp faintly, and the forest seems unusually still, as if holding its breath. Inside, the air is heavy with unresolved pain and pent-up emotions. Charles sits on a worn chair near the fireplace, his posture slumped, his face lined with exhaustion. Across from him, Caleb and Jonah stand side by side, their expressions unreadable but charged with quiet intensity. Rachel watches silently from the corner, her presence more observational than participatory, a witness to history unfolding. For the first time, there are no secrets left to hide, no lies to protect, just raw, unfiltered honesty. Caleb steps forward, breaking the silence. His voice is steady, though tinged with emotion. "You wanted us dead," he begins, his words cutting through the room like a blade. "Maybe not literally, but you left us there because you thought we were, what, cursed? Evil? Something you couldn't fix?" Charles flinches but says nothing, unable to meet his son's gaze. Caleb continues, his tone sharpening. "Do you know what it's like to be 6 years old and realize your own father doesn't want you? That he'd rather let you die in the woods than try to understand you?" Jonah places a hand on Caleb's shoulder, grounding him. When Caleb pauses, Jonah takes over, his voice softer but equally powerful. "We survived, not because of you, but in spite of you. Ma taught us how to live when you gave up on us. She showed us love when you ran away." Charles looks up then, his eyes red-rimmed and brimming with tears. "I didn't run away," he whispers hoarsely. "I was scared. I thought I was protecting everyone. From me. From whatever was happening to me." "And what about us?" Caleb demands, stepping closer. "Who protected us while you were hiding behind your money and your guilt? Do you even know what we went through? The nights we cried ourselves to sleep? The winters we spent freezing, wondering if anyone would ever come looking for us?" Overwhelmed by their words, Charles finally breaks down. He tells them everything: the psychotic break after Margaret's death, the hallucinations, the paralyzing fear that made him see them as something otherworldly. He admits that leaving them in the woods wasn't just abandonment. It was an act of cowardice, born out of his inability to face his own demons. "I'm sorry," he says, his voice cracking. "I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do is tell you the truth, that I failed you, and your mother, and everyone who ever trusted me." Caleb and Jonah exchange a glance, their anger giving way to a mix of sorrow and disbelief. They've dreamed of this moment for years, imagined countless scenarios where they confronted their father. But hearing him admit his failures aloud changes something. It doesn't erase the pain, but it humanizes him in a way they never expected. Jonah speaks again, his voice quieter now. "We found letters," he says, pulling out a stack of faded envelopes from a satchel. "From Mom. She wrote these before she died. They're addressed to you." He hands the letters to Charles, who stares at them in stunned silence. One envelope bears the date of the night Margaret supposedly fell down the stairs. With trembling hands, Charles opens it and begins to read. The room falls silent except for the sound of his ragged breathing. In the letter, Margaret pleads with Charles to seek help for his mental health struggles. She writes about feeling trapped in a marriage that had become toxic, about fearing for her safety and for the boys. She begs him to remember the family they once were and to fight for them before it's too late. When Charles finishes reading, he collapses into sobs, clutching the letter to his chest. "I didn't know," he chokes out. "If I'd known—" "But you didn't," Caleb interjects sharply, "because you stopped listening. You stopped caring. And when you did, everything fell apart." As the weight of Margaret's words sinks in, the dynamic shifts. Caleb and Jonah sit down across from Charles, creating a small circle. For the first time, they begin to talk, not as adversaries, but as people trying to make sense of the past. They share stories about growing up under Mara's care, recounting moments of joy alongside the hardships. They describe how she taught them to channel their anger into resilience, their grief into purpose. In turn, Charles listens intently, absorbing every word. He realizes that while he may have abandoned them, they refuse to abandon themselves. Rachel observes the exchange with cautious hope. She knows reconciliation won't happen overnight, but seeing them communicate openly feels like progress. By the end of the conversation, Caleb and Jonah reach a decision. They agree to give Charles a chance to prove he's changed, but only on their terms. They demand transparency, accountability, and a commitment to addressing the mental health issues that drove him to madness all those years ago. If he refuses, they'll walk away forever. Charles accepts without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes," he promises. "Not because I deserve it, but because you two deserve better than what I gave you." Though the road ahead will be long and uncertain, the twins recognize that holding on to hatred won't heal their wounds. Forgiveness might never fully come, but understanding is a start. The final scene shows Charles standing outside the cabin as Caleb and Jonah prepare to leave. They don't invite him to join them, but they also don't push him away. Instead, they offer a simple gesture, a handshake from Caleb and a nod from Jonah. As they disappear into the woods, Charles turns back toward the cabin. He picks up one of Mara's journals, flipping through its pages until he finds a note she left behind. Written in her neat handwriting are the words, "Even broken things can be mended." Charles closes the journal and gazes at the forest, which no longer feels like a prison, but a place of possibility. For the first time in decades, he allows himself to believe that redemption might be within reach, not through wealth or power, but through connection and courage. As the emotional confrontation between Charles and his sons unfolds, new revelations emerge that shed light on both the past and the present. These truths not only deepen the complexity of their relationship, but also offer a glimmer of understanding and perhaps even healing for all involved. During the heated exchange, Jonah reveals something unexpected. He was recently diagnosed with a rare psychological disorder known as hyperphantasia, a condition characterized by extraordinarily vivid mental imagery. While it can be harmless for some, in Jonah's case, it manifests as intense hallucinations, moments where his mind creates hyper-realistic sensory experiences indistinguishable from reality. "I see things," Jonah admits quietly, breaking the tension in the room. "Things other people don't. It started when we were kids. I thought I was cursed too, just like you did." Charles freezes, staring at his son with wide eyes. This revelation strikes a nerve. It's eerily similar to the visions that plagued him during his psychotic break 2 decades ago. Could Jonah's condition have triggered Charles's paranoia? Had he misinterpreted his son's struggles as something supernatural? Rachel leans forward slightly intrigued. "Hyperphantasia isn't dangerous," she says gently, "but if someone doesn't understand it, or fears it, they might mistake it for something else entirely." Jonah nods, his voice trembling. "Ma figured it out when I was older. She helped me learn how to manage it, how to separate what's real from what isn't. But back then, I think my episode scared you, and maybe that's why you left us. Charles buries his face in his hands, overwhelmed by guilt and regret. For 20 years, he believed he abandoned his sons because they were possessed or cursed. Now, faced with the possibility that his actions stemmed from misunderstanding, not malice, he feels a fresh wave of shame. I didn't know, he whispers hoarsely. If I'd understood, if I'd stayed. But you didn't, Caleb interjects firmly, though his tone softens as he adds, and now we're here, trying to figure out what comes next. While Jonah's diagnosis provides insight into Charles's paranoia, Caleb's life choices reveal another layer of resilience. After years of struggling to make sense of their traumatic childhood, Caleb pursued a career in psychology, specializing in trauma recovery and family dynamics. He explains that his work is driven by a desire to understand, not just their broken past, but how families heal after unimaginable pain. I wanted answers, Caleb says, addressing Charles directly. Answers about why parents hurt their kids, why fear makes people do terrible things, and whether it's possible to fix what's been broken. He pulls out a notebook filled with research notes and personal reflections, flipping through pages until he finds one marked with Margaret's handwriting. This is from Mom's letters, he says, handing it to Charles. She wrote about your struggles, the insomnia, the voices, the panic attacks. She begged you to get help, but you refused. Did you ever wonder why? Charles takes the page, his hands shaking as he reads. Margaret's words are desperate yet compassionate, urging him to confront his demons before they destroyed their family. Her plea underscores a painful truth. Charles's refusal to seek help didn't just harm himself. It shattered everyone around him. I was afraid, Charles admits, his voice barely above a whisper. Afraid of being weak, of losing control, of failing as a husband, as a father. And instead, you failed anyway, Caleb replies bluntly. But failing doesn't mean it's over. You can still choose to change, to be better. The conversation shifts as Caleb and Jonah share more about their lives under Mara's care. They describe how her guidance helped them navigate their individual challenges, Jonah learning to cope with his disorder, Caleb channeling his pain into a mission to help others. Despite the hardships, they found purpose in survival, refusing to let their father's abandonment define them completely. We're not perfect, Jonah admits, but we've built lives worth living. Lives Ma would be proud of. Charles listens intently, marveling at the strength his sons display despite everything they endured. He realizes now that they aren't just victims of his mistakes. They're survivors who turned adversity into growth. Their resilience humbles him, making his own failures feel even more profound. With these revelations laid bare, Caleb and Jonah propose a path forward, one rooted in accountability and mutual effort. They agree to stay in contact with Charles, but only if he commits to ongoing therapy and open communication. They demand transparency about his mental health progress and insist on setting boundaries to protect themselves emotionally. If you want a second chance, Caleb says sternly, you'll earn it, not because you deserve it, but because we believe people can change. Jonah adds, but this isn't just about you. It's about us too, about finding closure. If you can't handle that, then don't bother. Charles nods solemnly, accepting their terms without hesitation. I'll do whatever it takes, he vows. I owe you both that much, and so much more. The final scene shows Charles standing alone outside the cabin as dusk settles over the forest. In his hand, he holds one of Mara's journals, its pages filled with wisdom and compassion. Nearby, Rachel approaches cautiously, offering quiet support. They're incredible, she says softly, referring to Caleb and Jonah. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. Charles nods, tears glistening in his eyes. They are, and they got that way despite me, not because of me. As he gazes toward the horizon, the forest no longer feels like a place of fear or regret. Instead, it represents resilience, the same resilience his sons embody. Though the road ahead will be difficult, Charles allows himself to hope that redemption is possible, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of love and understanding. The confrontation reaches its crescendo as Caleb and Jonah reveal the true purpose of their return. They haven't come for violence or vengeance. They've come to force Charles into a reckoning. They present him with an ultimatum that will determine not only his future, but also the legacy he leaves behind. After hours of raw, unfiltered dialogue, where secrets were unearthed, wounds reopened, and fragile connections forged, Caleb stands up, signaling a shift in the conversation. His tone hardens, though it remains measured. "We didn't find you just to talk," Caleb says, his piercing gaze locking onto Charles. "We're here because we want justice, not just for us, but for Mom, for Ma, for everyone who ever believed your lies." Jonah steps forward, holding up two items, a thumb drive and a folded newspaper clipping about the twins' disappearance from 20 years ago. "This thumb drive has everything," he explains, his voice steady but laced with quiet fury. "Proof of what happened that night. Audio recordings of our conversations with people who knew the truth. Even copies of Mom's letters. If we release it, the world will know exactly who you are and what you did." Charles stares at them, his face pale and drawn. He opens his mouth to speak but finds no words. The weight of their threat presses down on him like a physical force. "You have a choice," Caleb continues, his voice cutting through the silence. "You can confess publicly. Tell the world the truth about abandoning us, about your breakdown, about everything. Or we'll do it for you." Charles slumps back into his chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of the decision before him. Confessing would mean exposing himself to public scrutiny, ridicule, and possibly legal consequences. It would destroy what little remains of his reputation and legacy. But staying silent isn't an option either, not if Caleb and Jonah follow through on their promise. I don't know if I can," Charles stammers, his voice trembling. "Facing all of you is one thing, but the whole world? I'd lose everything." "That's the point," Jonah replies sharply. "You already lost everything when you left us in those woods. This isn't about taking something away. It's about making sure the truth comes out. No more lies, no more hiding." Rachel watches quietly, her expression unreadable. She knows this moment is pivotal, not just for Charles, but for Caleb and Jonah as well. Their ultimatum forces Charles to confront the depth of his failures while giving him a chance to reclaim some semblance of integrity. Caleb kneels beside Charles, softening his tone slightly. "Look at us, Dad," he says, using the term deliberately. "We're standing here, not because we owe you anything, but because we believe even broken people can choose to do better. Confessing won't fix what you did, but it'll show the world and yourself that you're capable of owning your mistakes." Jonah adds, "And maybe, just maybe, it'll give others the courage to face their own truths. People like us, who've been hurt by someone else's fear or selfishness." For a long moment, Charles sits in silence, grappling with the implications of their demand. He thinks about Margaret, the wife he failed, and Mara, the woman who saved his sons when he couldn't. He thinks about the statue of Ethan and Owen in his garden, a hollow memorial built on lies. And he thinks about Caleb and Jonah, standing before him now, offering him a path toward redemption despite everything. Finally, Charles looks up, tears streaming down his face. "I'll do it," he says hoarsely. "I'll confess. Not because I deserve forgiveness, but because you're right. The truth deserves to be heard." Caleb and Jonah exchange a glance, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. They hadn't expected him to agree so readily, but they recognized the sincerity in his voice. This isn't just a tactical move to save himself, it's a step toward accountability. "Good," Caleb says firmly, "but this isn't over yet. You'll need to work with us every step of the way. No more running, no more hiding." Charles nods, his resolve strengthening. "Whatever it takes." The final scene shows Charles seated at a press conference table, flanked by Caleb and Jonah. Reporters pack the room, cameras flashing as whispers fill the air. Rachel stands discreetly in the background, watching as history unfolds. Charles begins speaking, his voice shaky but clear. "My name is Charles Wentworth, and for 20 years, I've carried a secret, a lie that destroyed lives, including my own. Today, I'm here to tell the truth." As he recounts the events of that fateful night, the abandonment, the hallucinations, the guilt, He keeps glancing at Caleb and Jonah, drawing strength from their presence. When he finishes, the room falls silent, the gravity of his confession sinking in. Outside the building, crowds gather, some outraged, others moved to tears. News outlets broadcast the story worldwide, reigniting interest in the case and sparking debates about mental health, parental responsibility, and redemption. Back inside, Caleb and Jonah embrace Charles briefly, not out of forgiveness, but as a gesture of solidarity. They know the road ahead won't be easy, but they've taken the first step toward healing. For themselves, for their mother, and for the man who once abandoned them. Just when it seems like Charles might finally face accountability, the story takes a chilling turn. What begins as a confrontation rooted in truth and justice spirals into something far darker. A psychological game of cat and mouse that blurs the line between redemption and revenge. After Caleb and Jonah present their ultimatum, Charles retreats inward, consumed by fear and self-preservation. Despite his earlier moments of vulnerability, he cannot bring himself to confess publicly. The thought of losing everything, the empire he built, the fragile image he clings to, is too much for him to bear. "I can't do it," he says, shaking his head as tears stream down his face. "I'm sorry, but I just can't." Caleb and Jonah exchange a glance, their expressions hardening. They had hoped for honesty, for a chance at closure, but now they realize their father is incapable of change, not without being forced. "Then we'll do it for you," Caleb says coldly. "But don't think this ends here." Charles pleads with them, promising to make amends privately, to dedicate his remaining years to helping them heal. But his words ring hollow. They know he's still trying to protect himself above all else. That night, tensions reach a breaking point. As Charles lies awake in the cabin, tormented by guilt and paranoia, he hears faint footsteps outside. He steps onto the porch and sees a figure disappearing into the woods. Jonah, carrying a backpack and walking silently into the shadows. When Charles calls after him, Jonah turns briefly, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. "You chose your path," he says softly. "Now we'll choose ours." The next morning, Caleb confronts Charles alone. When asked about Jonah, Caleb simply shrugs. "He needed space," he says vaguely. "We've been apart before. We always find our way back to each other." But there's something unsettling about Caleb's demeanor, an edge of calm detachment that wasn't there before. Charles brushes it off as exhaustion, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Over the following weeks, Caleb moves into Charles's estate, ostensibly to keep an eye on him. At first, his presence feels like a punishment, a constant reminder of Charles's failures. But slowly, insidiously, Caleb begins to take control. He starts small, organizing Charles's papers, managing household staff, handling communications with lawyers and business associates. Charles, overwhelmed by guilt and fatigue, allows it, grateful for the help. Yet as time passes, Caleb becomes more assertive, making decisions without consulting Charles and subtly undermining his authority. Rachel notices the shift and warns Charles, but he dismisses her concerns. "He's my son," he insists. "He's just trying to help." What Charles doesn't realize is that Caleb has no intention of leaving. He's not there to heal or reconcile. He's there to dismantle everything Charles holds dear, piece by piece. One evening, as Charles sits in his study nursing a glass of whiskey, Caleb enters unannounced. He places a photograph on the desk, the same one of Mara holding Caleb and Jonah as toddlers. Only this time, something is different. In the photo, only one boy smiles brightly while the other stares blankly ahead, his expression eerily vacant. "You never noticed," Caleb says quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. "One of us was left in the woods. The other never came back." Charles freezes, staring at the photo in horror. "What are you talking about?" he whispers. Caleb leans closer, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Jonah disappeared that night. Whatever came back wasn't him. It couldn't be. And now—" He pauses, tilting his head slightly. "Now it's your turn." Before Charles can respond, Caleb produces a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Don't worry," he says with a chilling smile. "You won't feel a thing." The screen cuts to black, followed by a brief montage. Shots of Charles's mansion, now occupied solely by Caleb. Newspaper headlines announcing Charles Wentworth's sudden disappearance, presumed dead. Footage of Caleb addressing reporters, speaking eloquently about continuing his father's philanthropic work. A final shot of the marble statue in the garden, its faces obscured by overgrown vines. As the credits roll, a haunting voiceover plays, Caleb's voice distorted and layered with echoes. The forest gave us life when you tried to take it away. Now it's taken you instead. One of us was lost, the other found, and the woods will keep their secrets forever.